Hey, welcome to this edition of Thrive. As always, I hope it finds you well and know that I really do appreciate you giving me this opportunity to encourage you and hopefully inspire you as you seek to be all that you can be and to live out of the fullness of life that is yours. You know, the older I get, the more I've come to appreciate that truism that less is more. You know, I've looked back on my life and I find that in my younger days, when I tried to create as much space as I could to fit as much in as possible, I actually achieved a lot less than when I began to slow down and make room for what was important. And I say that because I think that for you and I to say yes more fully to God, for you and I to say yes to the opportunities that are set before us, for you and I to say yes to everything that could be, we need to learn to say no more than we do. You know, I think that one of the most powerful words that you and I can develop in our vocabulary is in fact the word no. Because I think that so often what happens is that because we want to please, because we want to honor, because we have this sense of obligation, we end up saying yes when at times we should be saying no. And as a consequence, we not only rob ourselves, but we deny others as well. You know, one of the things that inspired me, I guess, to learn to say no more than I used to was when I studied the life of Daniel. You know the story of Daniel as well as I do, probably. You know, we tend to remember him as being the guy in the lion's den. But there was a lot more to him than that, as you well know. You know, I always found it fascinating in the opening chapter of Daniel as we see him being led out with his friends into captivity from Israel. As was the custom back then, as he was being led into Babylon, they sought to take the finest, the best, and indoctrinate them with their customs, with their values, with their philosophy, with their religions. And this belief that if they could get them to think like them, then they would become more compliant and they would not rebel, and that they would in turn influence the other slaves, the other captives. And so we read in Daniel chapter 1 how Daniel and his friends were in the king's court. They were being subject to this process of, let's call it indoctrination. And in the process, they were given the foods to eat that everyone else was given. And Daniel, in order to say yes to his faith, to say yes to God, he said no to the king's servants. He said, you know, we will honor you, we will make room for you, but we will not do it at the expense of God. And therefore, no to this food. And of course, you know the story, how God honored that no as he sought to put his faith first. And he went on to become a very significant influencer of the empire, even though he was still an outsider by nature and by birth. And I just think it says something very powerful to you and I. You know, in the temptation to say yes in order to fit in, to say yes to please our superiors, to say yes to please those around us, we often do so at the expense of ourselves. We often do so at the expense of God. I think sometimes if we would learn to say no more often, we would be able to say yes more often to God. We would be able to say yes more often to the things that are going to enrich us and empower us and help us become everything that God wants us to be. I say that because we live in a time that there is a pressure upon us to say yes to fit in. There is a pressure upon us to say yes in order to please those around us, or at least to not rock the boat. And yet every one of those yeses is a denial of ourselves, is a denial of who we are. It's a denial of our faith. It's a denial of God. And as a consequence, we are robbing ourselves and we are robbing God. Yet, if we would learn to follow the example of Daniel and to say no to the right things, God will help us and empower us and bless us in the right things. We will say, if we say no to that which will undermine our faith, which will deny our faith, which will take us away from the things that God has for us, then what will happen is that God will honor that in incredible ways. And we will find, like Daniel, that even though it may bring us into conflict with others, even though it may not always look like it's going to work out, that God will make ways and to honor our faith, to honor our commitment, to honor our yes to Him. And it will bring us into those places that our hearts long for. And so I want to encourage you to take a step back and to think around your life, to think around the things that make up your routines and the things that you have created around you, and ask yourself, are these helping me? Are these beneficial for me? Do I need to say no to some of these things? Do I need to say no to some people? Do I need to say no to some opportunities? Do I need to say no to some situations in order to more fully embrace what God has for me? You see, to say yes to God by definition means to say no to something else. You can't have it both ways. And I think that if you would learn to say yes to God more and no to other things more, that your life would begin to reflect the fullness of the faith that you long for. Your faith will begin to flourish and you will begin to thrive, because you will find that you are living out of that sweet spot that God always intended for you, because you have chosen to put Him and His things at the center of your life rather than on the margins. And so in these times when we need people of faith to stand up and be counted, when we need to hear the voice of wisdom, when we need to hear the voice of hope, my encouragement is to say no to those things that would cloud that, so that you can say yes and that your voice can find expression and God can use you to help be part of the solution to the problems that have surrounded us in these days. So I encourage you, take some time, work out what you need to say no to in order to say yes to what really matters. And then once you've worked that out, start doing what you need to do, no matter where it may take you and no matter what you may find flows from it. Because as you do, you will discover the fullness of life and the purposes that God has for you. So God bless you. Until next time,